Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, a Spotlight podcast. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
So whether you're a consumer receiving slow customer service or a business leader struggling to reach the output levels that you're used to, you may have noticed that there aren't as many people on the team as there was pre-pandemic. Here to share why childcare is a significant driver of our staffing levels is the co-executive director for Pulse at the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research is Miss Kathy Szenda Wilson. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you very much for having me.
So give the listeners kind of a high-level overview of Pulse. You know, how was the entity founded and kind of explain the affiliation with the Upjohn Institute, that kind of thing.
Sure. So I'm a recovering funder. I spent the first 17 years of my career in philanthropy and realized at some point that those that I was working with, that I was providing financial support to so that they could run their programs, needed something more. They needed the ability to focus on the system that they were a part of, the system that families experienced. And so I started getting really curious about what it would look like for me to step into that space of being a system builder. How can you create the synergy across programs so that the impact on families is less burdensome? And I founded Pulse back in 2012 with that thought. I wrote a paper that I submitted to two large funders in Battle Creek, Michigan. They were intrigued enough to give me the startup funds for it. For our first 8 years, we were housed within Michigan State University. And when the professor we were working with there retired back in 2020, we moved over to the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. At that time, the basis of our work is really on root cause analysis. It's really trying to figure out where the problems exist and then address them there instead of just doing things, right, of just busyness.
Right.
And what we learned was that the root cause of many of our challenges within the early childhood space, because that's where we're focused, was the workforce. So it made sense as we started getting really close to the Upjohn Institute and the folks there that we try and align ourselves with their work. And so they invited us in. Our small team, there are 3 of us, are currently employees of the Institute. We're still trying to figure each other out, but it is interesting because they come from a very different perspective that's really helping us, and I believe we're helping them. So instead of just seeing childcare as a barrier to employment, they're actually understanding the larger context, the fact that in and of itself, childcare is an employer who also needs support because they struggle with the workforce as well. So again, lots of synergy, still trying to figure it out. But I was pretty committed when I founded Pulse that it would never be an independent entity. I didn't want to have to manage a board. I really wanted us to be situated in a place where we didn't have to worry about many of the administrative challenges that go with running a nonprofit. And so we've been lucky enough between Michigan State University and Upjohn to have that experience.
Got it. Okay. So getting back to the childcare, I mean, we'll talk about a lot of this stuff, but so from an employer standpoint, it just seems like statistically there aren't enough slots available for the amount of children or the amount of parents with children that are looking for care. Is that a true statement? And if so, kind of shed some light on the statistics and what kind of barriers parents with children needing childcare are facing.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we know that right now there are just under 700,000 children in Michigan that are under the 5 and under. That's a lot of kids needing care. Not all of them need it, but many of them do, right? Working families are a critical part of our economic infrastructure, and if they don't have care, they can't work. And we knew that the pandemic really heightened that, right? When everything shut down
right,
and people had to be on their own, it was really, really evident, right, how much we depend on a quality, supportive childcare system. And so we know right now, depending on where you live is also, and how much money you make, depends on whether or not you can find care. So in my region, in the Southwest Michigan corner, the corner of Southwest Michigan,
yep,
we have counties where you have a 4.5 to 1 ratio around slots. That means for every 4 children, there's only 1 slot available, right?
Wow.
That means you're going to really struggle. And then there are other places where the burden, like in Calhoun County, is only 1.5 or 1.7 per slot. Still means there are people left out. So those numbers may feel less significant, but they are, to the people who it impacts, very significant. We also found that even if people have figured it out, and I put that in air quotes, It's rarely ideal. We surveyed 3 different employers in the Battle Creek region, and of their employed folks who already, these employers assume these folks had figured it out, 65% of them, on average, were actively seeking child care right now. So even if you have figured it out, you have grandma watching them a couple days, you've got a neighbor watching them another day, you're kind of piecing it together.
Yep.
It's not ideal, or you have care that isn't as quality as you'd like. So people are in this space of constantly looking, and it's expensive, right? So that's the other burden that is on families.
So these people, the amount of need versus the amount of people that are able to provide that, has that changed quite a bit since the pandemic? I mean, you referenced it, but were these numbers fine before the pandemic and now they're just kind of off the table, or were they bad and now they're worse? Or how is it pre and kind of what I'll knock on wood say post-pandemic?
Yeah, they were bad before and now they're worse.
Okay.
I think it was like the pandemic was an X-ray for us, right? It brought front and center all of the cracks and vulnerabilities within the child care sector. The people who do this work are heroes. They do it for very little pay. The cost, the business cost of providing child care. So if you're a child care business owner, all of your money goes to staff. I mean, practically the margins for you to make any money are so slim, and that's with you paying your staff very little. We have a lot of child care workers who are dependent on subsidies or some kind of financial assistance from the government, be that WIC or TANF or the SNAP benefits. When we have to do that, when people who are caring, we know that these first 5 years are crucial. Nobody argues that, right? All of the brain science tells us all the development happens in those years that is so critical to our future success. And yet we pay those folks that do that critical brain-building work some of the least or lowest salaries out there. And so we have to do something about that. We pay teachers a decent enough salary, right, in the K-12 space. We need to see these child care workers as teachers themselves and figure out how we shift our thinking to this being something that's a family issue that has to be figured out to how do we see this as a public good. Because we all benefit when we have good child care. The kids themselves are safe, the parents can work, and we're building our future workforce, right? All of those things are critical to all of us, and they should be important to all of us.
So, I mean, it sounds like this whole the whole industry, I'll just call it an industry, I guess, is kind of broken on all fronts, right? Because if you own a child care facility, the complaint is you can't make any money. If you are a child care employee, right, that works for one of these facilities, you can't make a living wage. The person that needs the care is kind of still complaining that it's too expensive. So, I mean, It seems like the stool just isn't built level. So, I mean, what is the path? I mean, I know that I'm asking you to dig into that, but where do we go? How do you fix just a broken system?
In systems thinking, what we call this is a wicked problem, right? Which means that there will be no singular solution. It means that we have to, I have a great friend who used to say, how do you drink the ocean? One sip at a time. You have to take apart little things and try stuff, right? So the Michigan TriShare, I don't know if you've heard about that or not, is a program that the state piloted a couple years ago and has now been written into legislation. So the budget it's included in ongoing legislation. We've got the cost being shared by families, employers, and the government, the state. So when you do something like that, and it's those who are eligible at a certain percentage of poverty, you are at least alleviating some of the burden on families. So that's one way to look at this, right? Another way is how are we looking at the pay structure? Right now, we know if we wanted to fund the true cost of care in the state of Michigan, and that means paying our early childhood workforce the MIT living wage, we need an additional $3.2 billion annually, if that gives you any scope of the challenge, right? So that's huge. We have to figure this out. It's going to take all of us to figure that out. It's not going to be just some simple turn on the switch and here's an extra $3.2 billion. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
So we're going to have to figure out things like TriShare. How do we bring people who don't typically see themselves in this space. So we work with a lot of employers. Like, what is their role in addressing this? Some of them, like CalSec, like Whirlpool, there are several others in the state, those are just two in our region, have gone so far as opening on-site care and subsidizing it pretty heavily. They see it as a recruitment tool, a retention tool, and they also know that it just impacts the culture in ways that are positive. So you have that, but you've also got things that employers could do, like just connecting their employees to services, like the childcare resource centers that will actually help you connect with care. They could be part of the employer resource network, where you have a success coach on site who helps people navigate things like childcare or transportation or housing, whatever the burden is that is on them that may keep them from staying employed.
Right.
So we're really trying to help address the wicked problem from many different ways. Another thing we're doing locally is that we were able to secure some of the ARPA dollars to pilot a housing incentive program for our child care professionals. And we have our first round of applications open currently, where we're saying we will provide support to you for rental assistance for 12 months if you commit to 3 years in the field. It's not increasing their salary, but it's decreasing their housing burden for at least 12 months, hoping that that gets them at least a little cushion, right? We know it's not the answer, but it's something that we could do. And so I think communities have to come together and think about those things that they can do for their child care folks.
No question. I want to pause and take a quick shout out to one of our sponsors today. When it comes to managing your finances and planning for your future, I suggest you contact my friends at Wagner Financial. Whether you're just getting started, getting ready to retire, or anywhere in between, Wagner Financial can help you make smart financial decisions. Don't navigate a complex problem on your own. Wagner has the expertise to help you feel confident that you're making the right financial choices. Contact an advisor by calling 517-853-3367 or visit their website at wagnerfinancial.com. All right. So, you talked about so much stuff there, Kathy, and one of the things that I wanted to latch onto is kind of the full 360 of the benefit of making sure we've got this childcare thing figured out. One was the employer being able to get the most productivity out of the employees that work there. The peace of mind and freeing up the stress level of the employees who are the parents of these kids. But the one that kind of snuck up on me was you talking about how prepping, making sure that these children, 5 and under, are getting the right type of start to life because they are the future workforce, and that they'll do better in school if they have a better start and all of that. So, talk about quality childcare versus not quality childcare. Do you have any studies or advice or direction that the efforts you feel should be put into to make sure that the childcare that these kids are getting are that of high quality?
Yeah, thankfully, there's a pretty solid early childhood ecosystem that works on that. We've got this thing called the Great Start to Quality, which is a database where anybody who is licensed, their information is in there, and they are required to do a certain level of professional development each year to keep their standards up, right? So they're learning about the newest things in development. They are having reviews of their site to make sure that it's safe, making sure there's no lead present, making sure that it's clean, making sure that, you're following certain health protocols. But I think, overall, we've got some really incredibly smart folks who are really paying attention to the science behind brain development and making sure that that's incorporated into the quality care that we see. Now, you won't always know that. My kids are really old, so this has been, I'm really going back a long time. They're 28 and 24 now, but back when they were young and I was looking for care, I didn't know what quality meant. I went on my gut, right? Like I would walk into a space and I'm like, this feels right. I feel like these kids look loved, right? Like our definition of quality has to incorporate all of those things. And some of them are not tangible, right? You can't put it on a checklist. It's just something that you feel because there's a culture created. So I think both have to be there. And I think that families, that's what they go towards. They'll be told, well, quality has to be about this number of children and this number of adults and this much space in between things, and the toys have to be made of this kind of, material, et cetera. All those things are important, but not alone. This is a highly relational business. Kids are not robots, and the people who care for them are not robots. So they can't be programmed.
Right.
You know, a lot of stuff that's unpredictable. So you need somebody who's got a high level of empathy, that understands, you know, not only the brain development. I mean, think about this. We have people leaving the child care space to work at McDonald's or Arby's because they can make more money and they have less burden, right? They can go home at night and they might be mad about somebody who came through the drive-thru.
Right.
They don't have the burden of worrying about a kid and whether or not they're safe at home.
Right.
We're asking these folks who do such incredibly important work to do it for such low pay. So quality, you think about that, the stress. So I'm also a certified master trainer in the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So I understand trauma really well and brains. And our brains don't function at full capacity if we are stressed. They just don't. I think you and I could probably both agree and think about times in our life where that was true.
No question.
If you were in a constant state of turmoil because you don't know if your bills are getting paid, you can't afford your own child care even though you work in child care, you are not at your best. And we're expecting these folks to be at their best. And most of them they're giving 100% of themselves while they're there at great personal expense. So it is really, really inherent on us to get this figured out and to honor them. We actually did a campaign last year where we had billboards and bus wraps and some other things around the community, just giving shout-outs to our child care workers, just to let them know they're not invisible. We see them. Thank you so much for what you do. And while that wasn't any money in their pockets, it wasn't decreasing their stress, that does something to you when you feel seen, right?
Absolutely.
And so yeah, quality is important, but I think how we define it also has to be inclusive of those intangible things that families need. And so I think we're making progress on that as well. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned early in the conversation about how these employers have done polls and were surprised at, you know, the fragile nature of their existing employees' the reliance on childcare. Talk about that study, and that's on your website. So share with us your website and the types of things that people can find on the website, including that survey or the poll.
Yeah. So a year ago, actually almost to the day, we had our very first CEO summit where we brought together some CEOs from the Southwest Michigan region to talk about the child care issue. We had Tim Bardick, who's a senior economist at the Upjohn Institute, give a keynote and really talk about the return on investment. And we learned from them at that event that they needed some tools. So we left that event, got some money from the state, and built the Pulse Roadmap. So if you go to pulseroadmap.org, you'll see a lot of the tools and opportunities that employers have to actually address this issue. And from there, we identified a few champions that we've been working with pretty deeply. They allowed us to come in and survey their employees so that we could understand what the need actually was and what their experiences were. So we weren't talking in the abstract, right? We were talking real experiences. And that's that when I referenced that 65% of them actively seeking childcare, that was a shock to them. They really thought if they're at work, they had to have figured it out, right? That increased their level of urgency around this. They thought, we have to do something. Now, I have to tell you that when they originally came together, they thought what they wanted to do was find a building and open it up and start their own child care, because that was going to be the answer.
Yep.
And I said, this is not Field of Dreams. You won't build it and they will come. You will similarly have issues finding child care workers. And even if you find them, they're going to be coming from another center where you might also have employees, then they're going to be out.
Right.
So
right.
This is, we have to figure this out carefully. And we've been walking them through over the course of this past year what it looks like to actually implement some of these things. And some really fascinating things have come out. Like one of our employers as a manufacturer started a different call-in line. So if you call in sick, and they'll ask you a question about whether or not it's child care related, they send you to another line, and they're starting to gather data, like getting really, really granular about what about their child care is the challenge that's keeping them from work, because they want whatever solution they come up with to match what the need is. The website has things on there like, how do you find backup care? If you wanted to purchase slots at a particular site, what does it look like to do that? This is really, if you think about it, child care should be seen as a benefit, much like a 401k would be, right? You could set it up similarly. There are lots of things out there that will be beneficial for both you and the employee. Their on-site care, I mentioned that a couple times, that is like the Taj Mahal. very few people are going to actually go in that direction. If you can, kudos to you, but it is really a huge lift. And then there are things like having employers review their policies to see whether or not or how family-friendly they are. Do they offer flexible scheduling? When there is, we have a lot of manufacturing. Our manufacturing base here at Battle Creek has, they struggle to keep people in the labor force, and much of it is because they have systems that are very punitive. And you miss 2 or 3 days, and you're no longer an employee. And I've talked to folks in community who are like, you know what, I would take a job at X company, but I know I'm 2 bouts of strep throat away from losing my job, so why even bother?
Wow.
Right? So how do we look at, okay, if that's the issue, then what would it look like for those employers to look at backup care or sick care, where you have a sick bay, where you have a nurse that you hire, and the kids can come in and stay there while parents are working? Like, there are solutions if we get down into it and use data to inform it. But people need to know first. So our biggest recommendation is that if you go to that site, look at the surveys. It's available on each one of the opportunities, and survey your employees. Find out what their needs are. That does not commit you to anything. It just gives you information. And what we have found is that the employees are grateful to be asked.
Right.
Their expectation isn't that you're going to solve it for them, but the fact that you actually see them is actually building their confidence in you. And so, just highly recommend folks to visit it often, because we are often putting news articles, things up there that will be helpful for you. I want to give a shout out to the U.S. Chamber Foundation, because they were the inspiration behind the site. They had developed their own roadmap, but it was very two-dimensional. It needed more, and so we asked permission to use that as the foundation for our site. And we did that over the course of this past year.
Fantastic.
And we're adding things all the time.
Well, Kathy, we could talk all day, but I want to remind our listeners that it is pulseroadmap.org is the website we've been talking about. You need to go check it out, look at the poll, and share it with your employees and see what you find out. We've been talking to the executive director for Pulse at the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research, Kathy Szenda Wilson. Thanks so much for joining me here today, Kathy.
Thank you, Chris.